So far in my journey to find the best dark tones for my drawings, I've tried out graphite pencils, carbon pencils and black colouring pencils. But there's a more obvious choice that I haven't really tested yet. Charcoal was one of the first things that came to mind when I started looking for ways to get better dark tones. But I always heard that charcoal and graphite just didn't mix, so I never tried them together. But today I want to see if I can find a way of using both in one drawing and find out, are charcoal and graphite really enemies? Or are they actually misunderstood best buddies? Let's figure this out. Today I'm going to be drawing Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa from the Furiosa Mad Max movie. I'm drawing the background and her face paint with charcoal and her face and hair with graphite. I'll also be trying to mix and match in some areas to see how they work when layering together. Now I already know that charcoal doesn't go great on top of graphite. This is because graphite is too shiny and smooth and doesn't leave enough tooth for the charcoal to grip onto. So for most of this drawing I'll be trying to keep the two mediums separated. But I'll also be testing how graphite does on top of charcoal. I've seen people using graphite for details on top of a charcoal base layer before, and I'm interested to see if I can make that work for me. I really like the look you can get with charcoal and I've enjoyed using it in the past, but because it's softer I often find that it's not as good for the fiddly details. I feel like a lot of the intricate and detailed charcoal drawings I've seen are really big, which makes it easier to do the fiddly stuff, because it's no longer as fiddly. On top of that, I just can't escape the all-round versatility of graphite. I've always loved using graphite. It's affordable, it feels nice, it's easy to use, the firmer tip lends itself to all sorts of detailed artworks, and it has such a wonderfully wide and easy to achieve range of tones. Its shiny finish and lack of deeper darker tones are really the only problems I have with it. So a combination of the two would seem like a great choice if I can get them combining properly. The area that I'm starting with is pretty simple all in all, but I am having a couple of issues. One problem I've had with charcoal is to do with blending. In my experience, blending stumps can leave it looking a little patchy, and when I try blending it with a tissue, it often feels like a lot of it comes off the page, leaving me with a much paler tone than I wanted. Maybe it's just a technique thing that I need to practice, or maybe it's to do with the type of paper, but it sometimes feels difficult to get the smoothest, darkest layers possible. And then there's the sharpening issue. These pencils are a bit thicker but much softer than my graphite pencils. If I'm really careful, my sharp point sharpener can get me a nice decent tip. But one of the reasons I love graphite is the ability to get a super thin pointy tip that's strong enough to do some really nice detail work. But again, that might be a lot to do with technique. I do tend to be heavy-handed with my drawing sometimes. All in all, the first section of charcoal ended up looking really nice. It might sound like I've been a bit harsh, but I'm self-aware enough to know that my issues with it are probably down to technique and a lack of experience with charcoal. And I really liked how the softer look and feel of charcoal really helped with the slightly blurry soft focus look of the background. Now we're working on our first section of graphite. This is something I'm much more experienced with, so this should go a lot smoother. I start with my usual routine for the hair. I outline some of the larger shapes and make sure I get my super dark lines in so I can keep track of where everything is. And immediately as I started filling in those areas, I saw the biggest issue with this pesky graphite. That damn shiny reflection. It haunts my nightmares and brings back such horrible memories of when graphite used to be my #1 main tool. I didn't think it would affect me that much, but I found it genuinely frustrating at times seeing that bright light shine back at me. I just couldn't find an angle with my setup where I could light the drawing properly but still see the actual tones of what I was drawing. And admittedly, maybe the feeling of annoyance is partially me being rusty after taking an almost year-long break in the middle of this drawing, but a large part of it is that damn shine. This used to be the bane of my artistic existence. Anyway, you may be thinking at this point that I hate graphite, but I really don't. Aside from the previously mentioned issues, graphite is a really enjoyable medium to use. It's comfortable and smooth, easy to blend, and has a really nice range of shades. And I'll even go so far as to say that in certain lighting, the dark tones I'm achieving with graphite aren't too far off the dark tones I'm getting with charcoal. So graphite is amazingly usable, and on the parts of this drawing that I could actually see, the drawing went off without a hitch. Now it's back to the charcoal as we move on to the face paint, and I got some really nice thick dark tones here. There was something fun about this forehead area, just a nice simple gradient type of blending. And then I briefly switch over to the graphite for the eye so I can get a bit more of that sharp precision. The most complex part of this drawing was the highlight area on her forehead. It's one of those areas that had a lot of intricate details that kind of blended together when you look at it from further away. It's always difficult to get the level right on areas like that. You don't want it to look too empty and lazy, but you also don't want it to look too overdone. Making these things look good up close and from far away can sometimes be tricky. I also use graphite here to get some of the very tiny details, then use my mechanical erasers for the super small highlights. I found that graphite and charcoal were both very easy to erase, and the graphite worked really well on top of charcoal. It laid down very easily, blended nicely, and matched up with the charcoal almost perfectly. I say almost because I can't help but notice something slightly strange. It's hard to see it on camera, because it's hard to see anything on camera thanks to the graphite shine. But something unexpected is that I think my graphite and charcoal pencils might be two different temperatures of grayscale. The charcoal appears to be a warmer, almost ever so slightly yellowy sepia tinted grey, while the graphite appears to be a cooler, slightly bluish tinted grey. Maybe it's just my eyes, but it brings up an interesting question of when is black truly black, and when is grayscale truly grayscale. Now it's on to the rest of the face, we're going back to graphite. Everything here is as it normally is, blocking out the shapes, building up the tones, a couple of smaller details here and there. The original image wasn't the most complex, the reference was a little bit blurry so there aren't too many fiddly details going on. And although there are quite a few details on the face, most of them weren't that tricky, so it was mostly business as usual. To be honest, the main reason I chose this drawing was because of a bit of a joke. See, in the movies, Furiosa covers her head in black grease, and it seems according to the lore of the movies, this is simply to denote that she's a higher rank. But in reality, the science of people doing this, like for instance some athletes painting black stripes under their eyes, is that the black absorbs light and reduces glare. And seeing as reducing glare is one of the effects we're going for here, I thought this would be a funny idea to do. And then it's up to the top of her head to start on this side of the hair. The lights in my setup are to the left of my drawing, and I try not to have them shining directly on the page. So as we move over to the right, the glare becomes much less obvious, and you can get a much better look at how dark the tones can get. The details in her hair look kinda complicated, but they were pretty easy in the end. The big chunk of it was a very pale, almost white tone, so I just gently ran my blending stump over it and then erased where I needed, so I can get some subtle tone variation. And then it's some basic block shapes and a couple of details here and there before we move on to the steering wheel that I'll be drawing in charcoal. Now then, I actually had some trouble with the steering wheel. There are times where I was finding it really tough to get the texture as smooth as I wanted, while keeping the tones as dark as I needed. Like I mentioned earlier, blending stumps can leave it looking patchy and tissues seem to lighten the tone, so I was struggling a bit here, which is especially frustrating considering how simple this part of the drawing is. But as I kept working on it, I figured out that if I went slow and steady with the blending stumps, I can mostly get the nice smooth consistent tone that I'm looking for. Yet again, my occasional need to rush proves to be my occasional downfall. This drawing really proves to me that I need more practice with charcoal, so I can really get a better understanding of how to get the best results. I think it's such a lovely looking medium. I don't really understand how it can look so different to other grayscale mediums I've used. There's something about the texture that looks soft in a way that I really enjoy. So we're almost done now. A little bit of graphite for the last bits of the hair, then some charcoal for the background. And here we have the finished drawing. Just a year in the making. Charcoal combined with graphite, graphite combined with charcoal. I think this turned out really well. The graphite shine is obviously an issue, and I'm not a massive fan of how it takes away from the contrast from certain angles. But I think there's something to be said for the sharpness of the graphite combining with the almost soft focused texture of the charcoal. I can understand why some people mix them and sometimes end up using graphite for the finer details of their charcoal drawings. However, I think there's a better solution, and I already know what that solution is. I like how this turned out, but I feel like there's an art tool that has all the benefits of graphite but without as much of the glare. And you can click the link up here in the top right to hear me talk about it. Thanks for watching, let me know what you thought of the drawing, and I'll see you next time.